Hello, everybody, and welcome to Communal Expressions. Today's episode is a series on solidarity economy, a series of interviews conducted by attorney Richard Rice. In these interviews, they discuss cooperatives, community development, and social justice. Go ahead and tune in.
And so today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard on our show. You're the author of Collective Courage: A History of African American Economic Thought and Practice, and you're currently serving as a professor of community justice and social economic development in the Department of Africana Studies at John Jay College, City University of New York. And recently, in August of 2016, you were inducted into the Cooperative Hall of Fame. And so we're definitely very fortunate to have you. Thank you for making time for us today. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, great. I just wanted to start off by asking you, how did you become an economist? What was it that led you to that particular profession?
Well, I actually came to it as I guess probably a third career. I started out interested in literature and African American studies, but the more I paid attention to what was happening in the world and wanted to think about creating social change, the more I realized that one of the stumbling blocks to all the good efforts and the resistance and struggle that we all were involved in was that we didn't have enough people who really could dissect the economic issues and propose alternatives and critiques from a place of expertise, I guess, in the field. That often people in the field, especially the conservatives in the field, kind of took up all the space and made it seem like none of the rest of us could participate because we didn't know the terminology and we, supposedly couldn't understand the principles and values behind economics and political economy. And so I decided that I needed to be one of those people who had the expertise in the terminology, but then could turn it on its head and use it for good and to make social change with. And I actually had always been good in math, even though it's not something I pursued as a career. But I realized that the economics career depends on people being able to handle math skills, upper-level math skills, and so I realized I was one of those people that could do it, and so I kind of owed it to the society that I said I wanted to be a change maker and a social justice worker with. I owed it to be one of the ones who would learn the master's tools and then try to use them for our own liberation.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's really interesting because a lot of times, other individuals who identify as, change makers or really want to be advocates for social justice, we forget about what large of a role economics plays in that.
Right.
So that's an interesting path to take to becoming an economist. It is, it's pretty unique. I studied economics in undergrad. It was actually my major, and I really gave strong consideration to pursuing a master's or a doctorate, and then ultimately decided to go to law school. But at the University of Alabama, we were, I guess we had like an economics department within the business school, but then there was also an economics department track within the social sciences department as well. And I always
I went the social sciences route, yeah.
Yeah, I would gravitate more towards social sciences as well. So I can definitely relate to that. And it's kind of cool for me because I was able to see your work from afar and then was able to kind of know you from working with you. So that's it's pretty cool. That's pretty cool
it's
for
been
me.
Cool for me. You're a wonderful person to work with.
Well, thank you for saying that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the historical perspective on cooperatives. I just mentioned my undergrad study. I studied economics as a major, but I was graduated from the business school, and we studied all types of business formations and in law school as well. But cooperatives were never on the list, really, not specifically mentioned. And so, one would think it's because cooperatives haven't really been around that long here in the U.S. When I first heard of cooperatives, I was like, well, this is kind of a new formation or something. But based on after reading your book and doing more research, I find that that's not true. So could you kind of give us a little brief overview of the history of cooperatives and then maybe tell us a little bit about why you think we don't learn about it more in an academic setting?
Right. And I actually didn't learn anything about it when I got my PhD in economics, though my school and my economics department at UMass now actually has a certificate in cooperative economics, but when I was going, they didn't touch that subject. So things are moving and changing. Cooperatives are really old as the hills. I don't know if that's the right word to say or phrase to say, but they really, cooperatives are really basically economic cooperation and collective work and responsibility, as sort of one of the Swahili terms that we use in Kwanzaa says. And so really every society in the world during every era have used economic cooperation. It hasn't always been the form that it's taken in the 20th and 21st centuries in terms of this specific business structure incorporation policies, but the notion of pooling resources, especially scarce resources, democratic participation in the decision about how those resources are used and how any surplus is used, collectively getting an economic activity off the ground and operating. All those kinds of things that are involved in cooperatives have been used from the very beginning. In fact, some of us think it was actually the first form of economic relationship, and then we moved into other forms like feudalism and capitalism. And then some places have always kind of practiced it. Some places have, gone in and out of it. Some places have been more informal with it. Some places have managed to do more formal. In terms of the formal internationally, the world kind of says that cooperative started in 1844 in England. That's where the Rochdale pioneers, who started a consumer cooperative as part of their labor organizing, sort of solidified some of the principles of cooperation, how we operate together, what we now call the 7 principles. In that case, it was actually 5, but now there's 7 of them, like one person, one vote, limited return on capital, autonomous, independent relationships, voluntary membership, concern for community, and cooperation among other cooperatives. So all those principles are what we now consider the backbone of a cooperative business ownership. A cooperative economic structure has to have those pieces to it. So it has to be democratic. It can't be the tyranny of the people who put the most money into it. It's the democracy of the members who join together and pool their resources to solve a problem. But the modern era kind of looks to the 1844 incorporation of these principles, and then by the late 1800s, the International Cooperative Alliance started, and most of the European countries practice some kind of modern cooperative economics based on those 7 principles. The U.S. and Canada, as well as many African and Latin American countries, also started using the co-op model based on that model, so that by the early 1900s, you again have a lot of countries using it, but especially the industrialized countries, except that the United States is pretty much the most backward of the industrialized countries in terms of not supporting, recognizing, or hosting a lot of cooperatives. Most of the other countries host a lot more and support more uniform cooperative policies and laws. So did that actually answer your question?
No, yeah, it definitely does. And so, I mean, that definitely answers my question. And so there's really been throughout history this kind of relationship between people where they come together to kind of pool resources and to meet their needs. And then we've seen even a long history in the United States of actually the formal institutional cooperatives has been around for at least the early 1900s or mid 1800s.
Right.
So
and then the informal activity even earlier, right? For the book, for African Americans, I trace back to the 16 and 1700s. There were mutual aid societies and other informal ways of pooling resources collectively, having democratic decision-making, and addressing community and family issues by working together.
why do you think that this particular motto or this way of being or existing, why is it not something that is more at the forefront of our academic studies, or even something that if I were to go meet with a business consultant today, most likely they wouldn't say, well, if you're trying to start a business, why don't you try to find a few friends with similar interests and pool your resources and try to create a common around some of the resources you would need to get started? Why don't we see this model being suggested more within business consulting communities or even in the academic sphere?
Right. So unfortunately, particularly in the United States, we have the ideology about individualism and capitalism. And even in my field, right, in economics, the notion is that capitalism is like the most perfect form of business ownership and economic development. And so that ideology has really permeated everything, because if you think about it, even our politics, right, most of our politicians are elected because they get money and from the wealthy, and the wealthy help to elect them, right? Well, the wealthy are the ones who are the capitalists who got their money through, plunder and capitalist, monopolistic, hoarding of resources, and they're the ones who pay for the political campaigns, so our elected officials are beholden to them. They're the ones who pay for lobbyists who would get the ear of our elected officials, so pretty much everything we do, and they're the ones who also kind of influence what kind of schooling we do for our children, right? So they want either us to raise children to be small business owners and capitalists, or to be the workers for the other capitalists, right? So basically they allow or demand that the education system also just teach people to be one or the other and not the alternative. So we really are kind of, strapped in to this system because it's perpetuating itself, because it's the one that creates all the wealth and the leaders and the leadership, and they are not really interested in economic alternatives. They're not really interested in making sure there's economic activity that meets the needs of all the people, right? Their model depends on exploiting people and running off with the spoils. So we don't get to hear about these models, and they try to squelch some of the models when they can, or if it's very small and doesn't seem to make too much of an impression or impact on their own profit making, they allow a few things to happen. So we do have a lot of credit unions they allow. They've allowed rural electric cooperatives because in rural areas, none of the capitalists wanted to put electricity in because they couldn't make enough money off of it. So where they didn't care about the market or didn't think they could make enough profit, then they've allowed cooperatives. And then sometimes for themselves, like the big agricultural cooperatives, they actually used cooperatives as a way to help themselves to make more profit.
Wow.
Sorry
Okay.
to be so skeptical. Sorry, so cynical about it, but you wanted the truth, right?
I do want the truth, definitely. Most definitely do.
That's the reality,
really,
unfortunately.
It is, and so that's a great transition into kind of my next question about, what are the core tenets of solidarity economics? What is a solidarity economy, and how does that relate to this concept of political economy theory? Like, can you first define what a solidarity economy is, and then talk a little bit about political economy?
Yes. So a solidarity economy really means a system of sense of responsibility to other people, to the rest of your community. And so solidarity economies are about organizing and practicing economics in a way that helps yourself and everybody around you. And so some of those same principles I mentioned about cooperatives can be applied in this case. So solidarity really is about non-hierarchical economic relationships and structures that help the greatest number of people. A solidarity economy economies also believe in protecting the earth because they believe in creating real sustainability. So that includes sustainable relationships that are humane and help build human life and humanity, but also that help save the planet and keep the planet healthy. So then you can also add sort of fair trade to that. The other thing about the solidarity economy is the notion that small grassroots invisible value has value in a solidarity economy. So gifting and bartering, people doing things for each other and sharing with each other, and you don't have to trade through the regular moneyed markets. It's really this human to human, community to community kind of relationships. I'm sorry, I forgot the second half of your question.
Well, I just wanted you to kind of talk about how that relates to this theory or this idea of political economy.
Oh, right.
Right.
And so the notion of political economy is that an economy is not a separate thing from the social networks and the human beings that create it and use it. An economy really is part of the social and power structures of a society, and that if we keep thinking of an economy as being neutral, as just being exchange or supply and demand, but don't really see how an economy is also, it's created by human beings for and about human beings, and depending on who has the power and control over resources, that's the kind of economic structures that are chosen. And so if you think about a political economy, that means that we actually need to be deliberate about what kind of economic relationships we have. We shouldn't make it seem like, oh, we have to have supply and demand and hierarchical economic relationships because that's the only ones that work. Those are the only ones that work for the people in power. But if you change your notion about an economy, really is supposed to be something that works for everybody, right? It's a way to make us all survive, to make food for us, to make the products that we need to help us reproduce our families. And then if we think about that as a whole system of relationships and human relationships, you add solidarity to that, then we're talking about human relationships that are non-exploitative, that are supportive of each other and land and ecology. Then you get a broader notion of what an economy is. It's not just whether somebody has a business and can make millions of money about it. It's about whether a whole society can thrive and everybody in it can have meaningful work, can feed their children, can have a roof over their head, can take pride in what they do, and can have some surplus so they can have some leisure and good time without ruining the planet.
Wow, that was really good. Thank you for that. And so that
I was going to say I could spend another half an hour on that, so I was trying to do some shorthand.
You did a good job. I mean, I think you painted a very clear, vivid picture of where we are, and it's kind of representative of some of the issues taking place in Birmingham. Right now, we have about a third of our population living at or below the poverty line. That number shoots up to over 50% for single-parent households.
Wow.
A substantial portion of our population is illiterate right now. When you look at a city that has a 74% black population, I think like business owners who actually have employees, it's like less than 5%. Less than 5%. And so we recently had an election. We elected a new mayor and several new city council members and several new school board members. And one of the overarching themes of the election was, that Birmingham is comprised of 99 neighborhoods, and we have in place what's called a citizen advisory board that kind of allows us to have each neighborhood to be its own democracy. You'll have a representative, and that information from the neighborhoods is supposed to kind of percolate its way up to City Hall, through City Council, and to the mayor's office. And many of the 99 neighborhoods feel like most of the investment and growth that has taken place in Birmingham has been going on strictly in the downtown area. Right. And so, our new mayor basically said that we wanted to make sure that we define our success as a city based on the lowest quality of life, individual in our city. And
so meeting the needs from the least of these on up instead of the opposite.
Definitely. So I wanted to ask you, what are some things that that we can ask of our new city council, of our mayor, to do to help build a solidarity economy, to build an economy that would be more inclusive here in Birmingham? What are some of the policies or programs that you would recommend for us?
Right. Well, I think the very first thing is to already see the communities, the neighborhoods as having assets rather than deficits, right? So even though, yes, we know we have the least of these, we have all those horrible statistics you just mentioned, but even within those neighborhoods, there are assets, wonderful things people are doing for each other. That's where we talk about the gifting economy and the barter economy, right? We have somebody who's driving somebody else's kids to school or taking somebody's kids in after school because they're working or something like that. So we have a lot of stuff that I think needs recognition. We also have people have a lot of skills even though they're unemployed and poor. So trying to sort of catalog people's skills, doing skills banks and skills exchanges and things, just so people start to see assets instead of deficits, I think is one way to start. Another thing is, I'm a very strong believer in co-ops, especially worker-owned co-ops, as a real strategy to help bring people more prosperity and to reduce sort of their dependency on outside corporations for jobs and outsiders to fix their neighborhoods. So thinking about, I don't remember how good Alabama's co-op laws are, but across the South it's been pretty regular that you don't have good worker co-op laws and that you need to revamp and update your co-op laws. So trying to figure out how to do that, even if it's just citywide to start with, making sure the Small Business Association and the Community Development Division of the Mayor's Office all understand what a co-op is and how to help people develop them. So that understanding in the agencies and among the officials, but then also I think we should start teaching co-ops in kindergarten. That's actually one of my new pet peeves. We should start teaching cooperative economics, cooperation, collective and solidarity economics from kindergarten on up. And so a city that had a whole program with modules or special projects and things, even getting the children to learn it with their parents on a Saturday morning or a summer program or something, or some evening things, would be a great way to also start introducing that this is a viable and effective way to do to do community economic development, and to get more and more people excited about the different ways that we can practice economic cooperation, because there's there's many different models of cooperative ownership. There's not one specific model. So once you figure out what's going to work and what a community needs and what might work in that community, it's very flexible how you actually do the cooperative ownership. And so once people understand the basic principles and the basic structures, they can be very creative for their own particular needs, how to actually structure a specific co-op. So just getting all that information out there, getting people excited about the possibilities, making sure the city and hopefully the state has more enabling policies. So we need education, we need the policies in place, we need more public education of our public officials, and then of course there does need to be some money put into the education part, but also money put into startup costs, so loan funds and grants that could be used to help people actually launch their co-op would be the next thing. I think you guys already have some co-ops, so another way to start would be to have I just lost the term, a co-op fair. That's not really what I meant. Showcase. So a showcase, actually what New York City started doing is once a year they get permission to go to City Hall and have a co-op fair. So all the co-ops in New York City that can make it come and have a stall or a table to talk about their co-op. So the city council members, as they're going to their offices, as they're going out to lunch, they pass all the tables and can stop and talk to people and learn about the co-ops and see what kind of co-ops are in New York City already, So then the next time they're asked to put some money into it or to pass a law that would enable more, they actually have a better understanding. But this way they don't have to actually go and see a co-op. It's right there in front of their office. So doing those kinds of projects could also help a lot.
That's a lot of great advice. And I think the idea of having a co-op fair is something that would be very popular here. There's several emerging groups that are, being intentional about forming various types of cooperatives, primarily worker cooperatives. And then there's a lot of other associations and groups in terms of artists who are already adhering or practicing these co-op principles, but don't necessarily use that terminology or really aren't aware of how it fits into the overall structure. So I think that's something that would be good as well. I know we have co-op.
And that again shows there's all different kinds of formats. So if a formal consumer co-op or even a formal worker co-op doesn't work for everybody, sometimes you can do a collective. There's nonprofit collectives. You can do what we call secondary level co-ops, like individual artists or individual store owners join a co-op that helps them to stay in their business, but they share the things that can be shared. So that's why I keep saying there's so many models of how to do this cooperation in a way that's going to work for the people who are coming together to address a need.
Well, cool. That's great. I think you answered all my questions. I have one more question, and that's when are you going to come back to Alabama and share some more of your wisdom?
Well, when I'm invited, but, I usually go to EPS once a year in August for the Federation of Southern Cooperatives annual meeting. So I'll probably be there again, the third week of August. But I do sometimes answer requests to come to a city and talk to people, and I actually enjoy meeting people on the ground who are really trying to make change.
Excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to do my part to set up an opportunity for you to meet with some of the decision makers here in the city of Birmingham. I think it's a great opportunity. I believe we have leadership in place right now that really wants to make a difference, but a lot of these concepts really are new. Haven't really been fully investigated, so it would be good for them to hear from someone like you. But you covered a lot of topics today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
How about that I come back on another time and we can talk more about worker co-ops in particular, and one of my new pet projects is to explore using worker co-ops in prisons, having incarcerated worker co-ops.
Oh, that's great.
So I would love to talk about that too. But I'm very excited about what you all are doing in Birmingham. I thank you for the privilege of even getting to talk to you guys, and keep up the great work.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I will be in touch with you.
All right.
As we get started, I would just like you to tell us a little bit about your background, and tell us, what's brought you into this type of work that you've been doing. You've been an advocate and activist for social justice, economic justice for over 50 years, I suppose. I recently saw a post that you made on Facebook about your grandparents who worked and lived here in Alabama. But just tell us a little bit about you, Ed.
Okay. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1949, and so I grew up in Arkansas in the 1950s during some pretty rough times in Little Rock around the time of the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. That was when I was 8 years old in 1957. I later went and attended that school in 1964. I went there and graduated from it in 1967. So my kind of introduction into activism was wanting to and finally going to Little Rock Central High School in 1964. Also around the same time that I was beginning to do anti-war work. There was a war raging in Vietnam that never made any sense to me. I got to be the state president of NAACP Youth Council and went to a conference where I tried to introduce a resolution to have civil rights workers made draft exempt because it didn't make any sense for them to be going halfway around the world fighting for democracy or claiming to be fighting for democracy in Southeast Asia when black folk couldn't vote in eastern Arkansas and Mississippi and Alabama and other places where the civil rights movement was still working toward getting some voting rights stuff established. So that's kind of how I got started. I graduated from Central High School in '67 and went to Cornell University, where I was very active in the Black student movement of the '60s. There's a documentary movie now that was just released within the last year called Agents of Change that I get to narrate a part of about some of our experiences at Cornell University in 1969 when there was a pretty epic demonstration on the campus there when I was the head of the Black student organization at at Cornell University. I left Cornell and came to North Carolina to teach at a small school we were building called Malcolm X Liberation University. And I stayed there doing that work teaching. It was I was teaching political economy, mathematics, and machine shop, and auto mechanics. I did. But the school ended up closing down, lack of money, lack of resources, and some ideological confusion as to the relationship between Pan-Africanism at the time and work in local communities in the United States. So I was involved in all of that. But I continued to do labor community organizing, and I was one of those people who, when I heard about the significance of working class struggle at the point of production, I actually went to work in a factory. And I did about 35 years of factory work of various types, mainly working toward trying to organize union efforts at the time. For people to be organized, for people to be able to speak with a common voice about their common needs and interests is a principal importance in terms of building democratic structures. So organizing unions on the one hand and organizing community groups and organizing parents to work around the education of their children. That's all of the various types of work that I did. When I
okay.
Go ahead.
Oh no, that's fine. Thank you.
I thought you might have had a question.
Yeah, well, I was going to kind of ask you a little bit about some of the organizations that you co-founded and the organizations you're working with right now, in particular the Fund for Democratic Communities. I want you to introduce the organization, Southern Reparations Loan Fund, New Economy Coalition, and talk a little bit about those programs. And then that could kind of help us transition into kind of some of the things that are going on in Birmingham. And then I'd like for you to kind of give us an analysis of, what you think are some of the opportunities for us to leverage some of those national and regional organizations that you're a part of to make an impact here in Birmingham now that we have new administration, stated that they want to move in a new direction to address poverty.
Okay, great. So in 2007, a friend approached me saying that a friend who I had been doing social justice work with for years approached me saying her father was about to die and was going to leave her a bunch of money, and that he didn't want to pay death taxes on it and wanted her to form a foundation so that his taxes would be easier. So I reluctantly agreed to help her with the formation of something that we ended up naming the Fund for Democratic Communities. What we thought was important, again, was building these democratic structures in communities where people could do things of, by, and for themselves for their own needs. So part of our work moved quickly toward the question of economic democracy. How do you help people with their needs and desires to have a more secure economic life? And for that, it became very quickly, we got involved in cooperatives. Because cooperatives, again, are these businesses that are organized around meeting a need for a group of people to get together to jointly and democratically govern, manage, and operate those businesses. And so, that's what cooperatives are to me. And we knew that it would be important if we were going to do cooperative work, that it needed to be done in marginalized communities where these are the communities where people were being most affected by the economic crisis and least likely to benefit from any end of the crisis. And as you've heard people talk about this jobless recovery, I don't understand what that means. If people are losing jobs, I don't understand how you recover from that without them gaining jobs. But this was a jobless recovery, and the economy somehow recovered while the people were still suffering. And it was in that light that we were trying to put together these efforts to build an organization, a grassroots organization that would work on cooperative economic development to help move toward people having economic self-sufficiency. Again, one of the principal things that we cared about was people being able to be productive for themselves and self-sufficient and self-determining. Self-determination, I think, is a really important principle that helps to make us human, for us to decide things for ourselves, rather than always have to exist as the victims of other people's desires and things that benefit them. So we built in around 2010 and 11, we built an organization called the SouthernGrassroots Economies Project that had three pieces of its work. One was a training session called Co-op Econ. The other was a money project that ended up developing into what is now the Southern Reparations Loan Fund. And the third aspect of it was policy work, which was largely led by the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The we that I was talking about wasn't just the Fund for Democratic Communities, but also we were working with co-op development groups out of Texas. We were working with people in Mississippi who had been part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement at the time. We were working with people from Highlander Research and Education Center. We were working with people in Florida with the Farm Worker Association of Florida. And we had national allies that we were working with the Federation, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. There was a financial group in New York called the Working World, and there was a kind of educational group called GEO, the Grassroots Economies Organization, that was the organizational home of Jessica Gordon-Nembhard, who wrote the book Collective Courage about the kind of a comprehensive history of Black people in the United States and the cooperative movement. So those are the people we're working with Co-op-Econ, at least with the Southern Grassroots Economies Project. What we found out later was that the kind of structure that we built was a little overbuilt, that while it was important to still have the cooperative training sessions of Co-op-Econ and that we were able to develop the loan fund, and we felt that the policy work could continue under the leadership of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. So we have maintained all three pieces of work now, but don't have the extra structure that existed when we had the Southern Grassroots Economies Project. Which kind of brings us to now, in a way. We're getting ready to have a Co-op-Econ gathering at the end of April, where we're hoping about 100 people from across the South will come and spend some time talking to each other about how they can do grassroots economic organizing in their communities, again, in such a way that it affects the most marginalized sectors of the community. We've had this a number of times. We're looking forward to doing it again.
Excellent. Well, yeah,
did I bring us up to date?
Mm-hmm.
I could explain some more about the Southern Reparations Loan Fund too. Let me say a little bit more about that.
Okay.
The Southern Reparations Loan Fund kind of follows in the tradition of the Southern Cooperative Development Fund that was started back in the 1970s by the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. But we're different from the standpoint of wanting to make sure that our work continues to connect us to marginalized communities. One of the things that a lot of loan funds will end up doing is begin by offering loans to marginalized communities, or at least saying that they will, but then setting up very, very stringent loan criteria that end up disqualifying most of the people that need it the most. We were able to model our work in a different way on some work that had gotten started in Latin America with the Recovered Factories movement. where a friend of ours, Brendan Martin, went down in the early 2000s to Argentina, helping with some of the factories that had been shuttered by their economic crises, that had workers willing to work and still had a need for the product of those factories, but they didn't have the money to get them back open. And Brendan Martin started out with his own money. I think he said that he had $50,000 available to go, and he pretty much moved to Argentina for a little while. And he said that $50,000 would go a long way in Argentina in terms of making small loans, sometimes for the purpose of buying a piece of equipment that was needed, sometimes for buying raw materials, sometimes for cutting the electric utilities back on for a business so that it could operate. And they were able to help a large number of small factories get back open and operating as worker cooperative businesses. And so we were looking at that model of how can you lend directly to businesses in a non-extractive way. And some of the principles and practices that they developed have become the basis of the work of the Southern Reparations Loan Fund, which also exists in a network of other loan funds that are being developed across the country, again, with the leadership of the working world, but with practices where we don't end up taking a large amount of collateral interest in people's homes or previously existing business property. We might hold a collateral interest in a piece of equipment that we buy, but we're not going to hold a collateral interest in somebody's house, where we make the process of trying to start a business something where you jeopardize something as fundamental as having a place to stay. We don't think that's right. We also think that loan fund repayments can be largely tied in a productive business to whether or not the business is actually productive in producing net profit. So that many of the loan contracts that we write are written in such a way that the repayment is contingent on the loan actually helping to facilitate an increased profitability, that it increases the profit to the borrower, which always puts us as a loan fund in the same position as the borrower, which is to say we only benefit when it benefits the borrower of the money. We're not going to make a loan where whether you pay it or not, we benefit because we take all your property, as is a standard practice in a lot of the lending that takes place. So now the Southern Reparations Loan Fund exists. We've made loans to a farm co-op in Mississippi and to a project to do silk screening out of Florida, and to a grocery store project, a fairly substantial loan to the grocery store project in Greensboro, North Carolina, and are looking to close a loan pretty soon for some people engaged in doing a housing, developing a housing cooperative among some immigrant communities in the western part of North Carolina. That's one of the newer loans that we're working on.
Well, that's excellent. Can you talk to us a little bit about, like, what's the process for cooperatives or prospective businesses to apply for access to loans from the Southern Reparation Loan Fund? How does that look? What is a good way for a business to kind of get themselves in a position to be able to qualify for something like that?
Well, they need to contact us and let us know what the business idea is. And what we're going to be particularly looking for is what business idea is it that's actually likely to produce a profitable business that will have a revenue stream. And for that to work out, it's going to likely have a value proposition, something that it offers the community that people actually want. It'll have some capacities in terms of the ability to deliver people that value proposition, and it will have some analysis of the revenue stream that will come by virtue of the fact that the input costs are going to be less than the output sales revenues. So we end up working a lot directly with people with the development of projects, sometimes from the inception of the idea all the way to its fruition. But we like to think of ourselves as being on the same side of the table with the borrower, again, because our repayment is going to be tied to the success of the business. We want to be right there with them, helping them figure out how to make the business successful. And what ends up happening in some cases is that people come up with an idea that's not as well thought out as they think it is, and we help them think through it in the process of even trying to close the loan.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good information. It really is. And I really wanted you to talk a little bit about what's going on in Birmingham. But first, can you describe this concept of productive justice, what that means, and how you believe that's a solution to some of the systemic issues such as poverty facing our communities today?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. A lot of times when people think about economic justice, they think about it simply in terms of redistribution, where they leave the existing structures in place and just talk about, well, how are we going to shift the money around? There's some rich people and some poor people, so let's take money from the rich people and give it to the poor folks. What is also the case is that we have a lot of inequity at the level of production. In other words, there are people who are willing and capable of working, but don't have opportunities to work and be productive because they're denied the opportunity to have access to the land that they need, or the tools that they need, or the other raw materials that they need, or the energy sources that they need. And if they had these things, they would be able to be productive and, in fact, produce more than they need for themselves. Every system of exploitation is based on the fact that the people who work in it produce more than they themselves need, and the owner is the one who takes the difference. That is the surplus that is determined at production. The other thing I want to say about production and why it's so important to us is that production is connected with power. In other words, the decision of what you're going to make and what you're going to sell it for and what kind of materials that you're going to use are the fundamental kind of decisions that determine whether a community will poison itself with waste products or carcinogenic materials, or whether it's going to have clean and fresh water. So these are things that happen, in the realm of production. And a lot of times we have heretofore, and a lot of organizations who talk about economic justice are only talking about justice at the point of consumption or even distribution. And we think that the productive aspect of it, being able to be in control of and decide how, why, and for whom things are produced is a key part of it. And in fact, if you think about the long march of civilization, it was humans' ability to build tools that allow us to be productive in a way that other animals are not, quite frankly. And so that in a way, being productive is what makes us fully human, which makes why it's so important that we can use our hand and our eyes and our brains the way we do, is because it allows us to organize a way to be more productive on the earth than just picking up what's already available on the ground and consuming it. We're able to be producers, and in being producers, we can shape the world, we can shape life, we can shape history.
Yeah, definitely. That's good. That's really good. And I mean, that really helps us reimagine the way our society is functioning. I mean, and I think that's the type of ideology or framework that we really need to create, the type of institutions to eradicate some of the systemic issues that we're focused on organizing around. Here in Birmingham, we've had several establishment of new institutions, including a community land trust, the Dynamite Hill Smithfield Community Land Trust, located in the historic Smithfield community. We've had several cooperatives to be established. I saw recently there's a new group that has come up where there's a group of doulas who are coming together to try to pool their resources to be able to help more people in the community. And all of that's kind of culminated with the election of a new mayor who's, put in place a social justice committee. And out of that committee, we've made recommendations about the creation of an Office of Racial Equality and Social Justice. We've made other recommendations, including things like participatory budgeting, which is something that, was introduced to me at a global social economy forum a few years ago. And so some of these new ideas are really starting to percolate here in Birmingham and really being given an opportunity to grow and flourish. And so what I'd like to ask you, Ed, is what kind of advice or suggestions would you give us to be able to tap into some of the national resources, or what are some of the things we can do on a local level to promote policies that will allow this type of cultivation to continue?
Very good question. First of all, I just want to congratulate you all on where you are and the fact that you're working with some people that are determined to move some of this stuff forward. One of the cautions I want to make is that, in spite of however sensible what I was saying about people being productive, however sensible that is, it's difficult because of something I will talk about, the domination of capital, the domination of money. That big money distorts the way almost everything happens. It's distorted agriculture with the whole industrial agriculture that takes place now, which makes it very, very difficult for a small farmer, even though he is able to be productive and produce more than he needs for himself to eat. It's hard for him to produce the kind of income that's required to buy some of the things he needs because of the way industrial agriculture distorts and cheapens the cost structure around growing food. The same is true of a lot of other businesses. So our efforts to build cooperative businesses are challenging and they're difficult, and we have to be really, really smart about it. The other thing I want to point out is that it's important that people try to do things where they have the capacity. If I was going to start a co-op business, it would be kind of stupid for me to start a cooperative dance studio because I'm not going to be somebody who's got the capacity to go out and teach dancing. And sometimes people have. Huh?
You could teach music classes, though.
I could probably teach somebody how to play an instrument, but I wouldn't want to teach the dancing. And and I think that this whole question of utilizing our capacities and the things we know how to do is really important. So I've seen people working on cooperative development, and they'll come up with some idea about something that they have never done before and really don't know, and think that they're going to be able to build a successful business around it. And it's just very, very difficult. But a couple of things. One is I think that you need to think of this stuff in terms of kind of long haul work, because some of it won't produce immediately successful results. But it's based on a principle I think has to be grounded, which is, again, that people are capable of being productive, and that economic crises typically take place when you have people who are willing and want to work, and there's no work for them. What work for them means is that there's some structure that has the tools and the equipment and the energy and the things that it needs that the people can apply their labor within. So the challenge of cooperative development is to make sure that we can assemble those kinds of things and assemble a revenue stream. So one of the things that local governments can do, for instance, is to set up a preferential situation where they prefer to deal with businesses that are owned within the community. And this can be something as simple as buying office supplies and selling it to local government. You could have a business that is office supplies business that knows sources of wholesale paper and staples and pencils and ink that then is able to supply those things in a timely way under city and municipal contracts. So one of the things you can do is begin looking at the municipal budgets, at what are the things that are bought from outside of the community, and then what would be the business opportunities that could be created if people were determined to buy those things from inside the community, particularly if they were able to do it on a cooperative basis. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. The something called an anchor institution model, which has to do with using government structures, whether they be government-run health facilities or other kinds of things, that will set themselves up as being the stable customer for certain kinds of businesses. One of the places this has worked particularly well has been in Canada, in Quebec, where there was a loan fund established that was able to allow people to invest in and support kind of local social service activities. So these things were built on a cooperative basis, funded out of this loan fund, and the local government would be the ultimate purchaser of these services, whether it was daycare services or actually in some levels health and other services. So it's a question of trying to identify what are the business opportunities that local government can serve as a customer for, and also find other ways to privilege cooperative behavior over the kind of individualistic behavior that privileges kind of individual entrepreneurs. One of the examples in here in Greensboro is that we were able to get a couple $100,000 from the city as part of the financing package for a grocery store, a cooperative grocery store in an area that had been a food desert. Now, this was actually smaller than what we had been promised. It turns out to be a little larger than what some other cities have done. Other cities are doing, really massive. There are a couple of places in the country that are doing really massive cooperative development under city leadership, and that's New York City, where Mayor de Blasio has, I believe, pledged about $1.5 million a year for cooperative economic development. And this is money that he has put into development organizations so that they can do their organizational work. Some development organizations are funded by philanthropy. Some others are funded by kind of fee-for-service work. But that's very, very difficult because a lot of people starting businesses do not have the funds to pay for the professional services that they need to get started. So de Blasio has made available a pretty good chunk of money in New York that some organizations that had been doing cooperative development work for a while can make use of. Another place where this is happening is Madison, Wisconsin, where the mayor and the town council there in Madison have set aside a pretty good amount of money for a 10-year period to do cooperative development. So that's one of the kinds of things that that the mayor there in Birmingham could look at is, are there some pockets of funds that are available for local economic development that can be earmarked specifically for cooperative economic development rather than the broader range. One of the things I've enjoyed telling people about is that communities can be their own developers in a way. Right now, what a developer does is he'll conceive of a project and he'll kind of organize some of the resources for that project. But ultimately, as the project is built, that developer owns it. A lot of times there is a lot of involvement of local government with developers. In fact, almost all the time, most local governments are almost run by developers. But a lot of times what the developers will do is they'll get pretty much sweetheart deals from the local government because in situations where the situation of market failure, where the market doesn't produce the desired result, the market theory will tell you that anytime you have a shortage of something, it's going to cause the prices of it to rise at such amount that somebody's going to be incentivized to fill that gap and produce it. And this is how the market can regulate everything. If you think about it, though, that makes the market a terrible way to distribute services around food or health care, because at those points, a shortage may end up escalating the price. But when that happens, people can't afford to buy it, and consequently, some of their fundamental needs are not being met. So the market is not, and there's clearly market failures around food delivery, healthcare delivery, and other kinds of things. So one of the kinds of things I tell people is the communities need to be able to organize themselves so that rather than the government subsidizing a private entrepreneur to guarantee the profitability of him doing something in the hope that a social benefit trickles down from his guaranteed profit, rather than doing that, that the local government entity can directly work with some structure that is rooted in and based in the community to meet a community need in such a way that the community benefit is built into the activity. And just as though they would otherwise guarantee profit, and they do this by sometimes buying land at its value and making it available to a developer below value, or holding off on property taxes or licensing fees and giving other advantages to developers, that they can give those same kind of advantages to a community entity that is developing something for itself in such a way as to guarantee its sustainability. And what we're moving toward and trying to work at is processes and projects that don't need ongoing subsidy. again, by virtue of the fact that people do have this potential of being productive.
That's excellent. That's good, Ed. Could you talk a little bit about co-op econ? I know it's on the horizon. It's coming up soon. I want people here in Birmingham to be well aware of what you mentioned it earlier. Tell us about what it is and what are some of the plans for this year, and whatever other information you can offer on it.
You know, as conference-like things go, it's a relatively small gathering. It's going to be about 120 participants total, because it's more a training institute than it is a kind of a feel-good conference. The idea is to assemble some people that are going to spend some time. The theme this year is the relationship between cooperative development and community organizing. And they're going to spend a lot of time in sessions where they're doing kind of simulations of some of the organizing work that you would have to do in order to be to effectively organize the community around these economic ventures. And part of the model of it is some of the kind of role play that was done in training organizers during the civil rights movement, where people essentially enact the scene and get a chance to answer the questions that they'll have to answer out in the community. And so we'll have simulations of city council meetings where someone's trying to make a presentation, and we'll have simulations of community meetings where someone's trying to convince somebody that they have a good idea. We'll have simulations of people going and knocking on doors and trying to explain to somebody why they would like them to be involved in some effort that they're working on. So there's going to be a lot of that. There are also going to be nuts and bolts sessions on things like legal structures, on best practices around financial record keeping, some of the essential practices around that, how to conduct meetings effectively, how to deal with the governance of these structures that are governed cooperatively but still managed professionally. So we're going to have nuts and bolts sessions on those kinds of things. It's going to be held in Epps, Alabama, down kind of in the south, almost in the southwest corner of Alabama. Well, y'all know better than I do in Alabama where Epps is. It's a couple of hours away from Birmingham. And it's going to be April 20th through the 22nd. We're going to start with a kind of introductory session that's going to be organized from people from the Democracy at Work Institute that's going to do an introduction to cooperatives for people who really don't know much of anything at all about it. And then we're going to go into the deeper dive around these simulations and some nuts and bolts and some, harder things for the next day and a half. Going to start on that Friday and end on Sunday afternoon, hopefully in time for people to get back to work on Monday if they're working.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, that sounds really good.